Well, hi again, AP Gov. Welcome back to our vertical reviews. And we are doing vertical review 2 today of politics and power. So we're going to look at this theme throughout the 7 periods that we're studying for this year's little exam. And we'll go into periods 8 and 9 just to make it interesting, right? So we're looking at the trace of who had power, how they used it, and what the politics of the time were. The party systems that we had talked about and stuff. So when we look at period 1, 1492 to 1607, this is the time when Spain is really dominating politics and power in the New World and in parts of North America that will become the United States as we know them today. Now, the Spaniards are here. They're establishing colonies. They're using the encomienda system, etc. They're really dominating what's happening around here, especially in what will be the American Southwest, Florida, Gulf Coast, that region, and moving up the Mississippi River. The French and Dutch are also here, but they're really just kind of coming, establishing a small trade post, getting in, getting out. They're not attempting to settle anything. When we look at how that power and the politics are shared with the people who are already here, we see that there are treaties with Native American nations, especially by the French and the Dutch, and a lot of conflict with the Native Americans, especially with the Spanish. So that's kind of how power, who's wielding power and how they're using power in those early days. It's going to change. 1607, Jamestown, the introduction of English America, things are going to start to change. So we see that power becomes a local thing. Power is held by the people in English America because England is really not trying to directly control these colonies. You remember the policy of salutary neglect that we talked about, where basically the king says, yeah, we got all these rules, but you guys do what you're going to do over there. So local power is being established, and that local power is by and large pretty democratic. The people who are, of course, white landowning males, are kind of allowed to decide for themselves what's going to happen in their little corner of the world. Town meetings are held where everybody in a town gets together. They decide jointly, here's how we're going to pay for a new bridge over the creek, etc. When we look in the South, it is acting a lot more like a monarchy, which frankly is what we still see today. The South is this monarchy where the landowners have their serfs on the land, who in the beginning, of course, are people coming over as indentured servants, and later are going to be enslaved people from Africa. They're going to run it the same way. You are the serfs, you work on our land, we decide what's best for all you little people. By period 3, when we get to the French and Indian War, now we're going to start to see that the exercise of politics and power is going to be at odds with the British system, whereas we had been basically ignored by the crown for the better part of 150 years. Now there's going to be this intense conflict with the crown. What is that conflict over? Should we have representation in the House of Commons, which people in the colonies did not? Should they have direct representation instead of virtual representation by the people back in England? They believe we should have direct representation here. They believe that if you're going to tax us, we should have a say in who's voting for these taxes. No taxation without representation. Then the Declaration of Independence, right? And the formation of the Articles of Confederation, which were this incredibly weak system of governing. You didn't really have a country. You had 13 separate countries that belonged to a club called the United States. The Articles of Confederation, of course, are a failure. And the Constitution is negotiated to create a stronger central government and really make the United States of America instead of these United States of America again. First party system, Hamilton versus Jefferson, Federalists versus Anti-Federalists, people who believed in a strong central government versus people who believed in a weak central government. Our first 2 presidents, Washington and Adams, were strong central government guys. Then in the election of 1800, Jefferson wins as a states' rights guy. And states' rights is going to be a problem for the next 70 years. I shouldn't say a problem, it's going to be an issue for the next 70 years. So Jefferson kind of believes in this aristocracy, this government by the betters, but he believes it should be democratically elected. And that's the way the party system is going to stay until the late 1820s, when Andrew Jackson runs for president once, loses, runs for president again, and wins. And Jackson says all white men should have the right to vote. Some of this is something he truly believes. He truly believes in greater democracy. Part of it is he realizes he can use these guys to get power. He can use poor white men to get power. You see conflict really erupt after the 1870s. Jackson's presidency is really kind of a bellwether for this, though you can track it back to 1820 and the Missouri Compromise. There's really a lot of conflict between the North and South over whether there should be slavery in the new territories. With the Missouri Compromise, of course, Missouri gets let in as a slave state. Maine gets let in as a free state. They establish a line at 36 degrees, 30 minutes north latitude, saying anything new above the line will be free. Anything new below the line will be slave legal. And this sets a pattern for saying that anytime a slave state is let in, a free state is let in, or vice versa. And that's going to become a enormous problem by the time we get to 1850 and 1854. We have the second party system erupt during this time, Democrats versus Whigs. Whigs tend to represent Northeast business interests. They believe in lower taxes. They believe in a national identity and central national power. They believe in internal improvements. They want canals and railroads to really bind the country together and create a national economy, whereas the Democrats are, leave my state alone. My state can make its own decisions. My state doesn't need your stinking railroad or your canals. We got our own economy in Illinois and we'll be just fine without you. As we move into period 5, we see this change. Period 5 is the era of the mediocre presidents. You won't find our pictures on dollars or on cents. And you have the Compromise of 1850, building on those earlier things like the Missouri Compromise. You have the Fugitive Slave Act. You have popular sovereignty. And Miss Hamsky went over all those with you guys in a really good video a little while ago. The Republican Party emerges and we have a new party system. The Whigs cease to exist, and the Republicans kind of wrap in the old Whigs who cared about strong national power and internal improvements, but they wrap it around the issue of slavery. They become the anti-slavery party and the pro-union party. And of course, the Civil War is going to break out as a result of the first Republican elected to the presidency in 1860. The Civil War is fought, and after that, we have an entirely new political system where equal protection under the law is granted to all people. African American men get the right to vote, though women still do not. That propels us into period 6. And period 6 kind of it goes back in time a little bit to the end of Civil War and looks at the growth of America's national power. From 1865 to 1877, you have the period of Reconstruction where African American men are in many ways fully participating in the political system. But when Reconstruction ends, it's stolen away from them again. The end of Reconstruction really creates a entirely new and awful series of events and conditions that are going to persist through to the present day in some ways. Jim Crow segregation becomes law at this time. The separate but equal segregation is going to become law throughout the South and really throughout parts of the North as well. And Republicans are going to maintain power. When we look at party politics, if we go up to, period 3 is where this really starts. We've got the first party system of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists die out. The Anti-Federalists kind of become the Democrats. So then it's Democrats versus Whigs in the second party system. And then we have Republicans come in the third party system, and it's Republicans and Democrats, and really it's just Republicans. Republicans dominate national politics throughout this period from the end of the Civil War through the Spanish-American War and really through to World War I. And honestly, you can actually look at Woodrow Wilson as the outlier, that really Republicans are in power from 1860 to 1932. With only 2 breaks, Grover Cleveland and Woodrow Wilson. Um, Wilson is going to become the first Democrat in period 7 to win power in 1912. He serves his 2 terms. Then we go back to Republicans for a long time. And then 20 years after that, FDR becomes president and serves his unprecedented 11 years, good gravy, serves his unprecedented 12 and a half years, or 12 years and change, because he dies at the very beginning of his 4th term. And that, of course, is going to lead us to change the Constitution with the 22nd Amendment to limit presidents to 2 terms. Women get the right to vote. Again, the right to vote gets expanded throughout time. We still see segregation and disenfranchisement for African American people. And then when we get into period 8, we see that dam breaks with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Acts of 64 and 65. Democrats really maintain power from 32 to 1968. They have kind of a 30-year run, and then Republicans come back roaring again. We have Nixon from 68 to 74, Ford from 74 to 76. You get the blip of Jimmy Carter, and then you get Reagan right up until 1989, Bush until 93. So you go from 68 to 93, almost entirely Republican. Then you get Clinton for 8. So it goes Democrat for 8, then Republican for 8 with Bush, then Democrat for 8 with Barack Obama, and then into the current Trump era. Democrats have power until the late 60s with Nixon, obviously. You have the civil rights movements in the 50s and 60s, the women's rights movements in the 60s and 70s. You get an environmental rights movement in there. And then with 1980 and Ronald Reagan, you really have this rise of conservatism in the United States. A conservatism that had been rejected in 1964 in the Goldwater election and is now embraced in America as something absolutely necessary. We also see political power in the country really shift to the South and West. People move out of Ohio. They move out of Michigan. They're chasing jobs down to the Sun Belt from Georgia and Florida, across through Texas and Arizona, and out to California. And we see that a lot of political power goes out to those parts of the country. That concludes our vertical trip through politics and power. And I'll talk to you again for vertical 3.